How's it going, everybody? My name is Malachi Smith, and the idea that I'm going to be exploring for the final is a concept that I think I'm going to call table manners. I'm not entirely married to the name so far, but my concept is going to be a video podcast. And my basic concept idea was trying to orchestrate people from different walks of life and sit them down and explore differing opinions that they have or similar opinions that people might be surprised that they share, and just try to explore identity and expand the social sphere by facilitating conversations that may not have occurred in a natural setting. And I came up with that name because I thought it would be an interesting setting to have these two parties, and that could be a comedian and a stoic, or a Republican and a progressive, or a religious figurehead and an atheist. It really doesn't matter. I think the main thing of importance is finding two people who you wouldn't normally expect to be conversing and try to facilitate an interesting and constructive conversation between those two. So, to try to introduce some level of familiarity and comfort, I think that going to a restaurant or some familiar setting, sitting those two people down, starting with some non-inflammatory questions to just build a rapport and get the conversation started, such as where did you grow up? What did you do as a child? What is your favorite type of media to consume? What was the most exciting day of your life? Pretty basic questions that are just going to get the ball rolling. That would be the jumping off point. And I think if an episode were to be around an hour to an hour and a half long, after the first 15 minutes, the people have sat down, they're eating, they're feeling comfortable, they're responding to these relatively inane questions. Once that ball has gotten rolling, that's when I think the host and both of the guests should be prepared with questions that they'd like to explore with the other person that they're there with. So those questions could be, what do you think the main issue facing your organization or your country or whatever they're interested in discussing are at the moment? How would you address those issues? What are you the most passionate about? What do you think is the most pressing topic that needs to be discussed in popular media today? So on and so forth. And the host would definitely have the aim of being involved as little as possible. And the focus of the video of each episode would be the uninfluenced dialogue and conversation between the two guests and exploring the topics that they explore naturally and examining the interaction and the chemistry that they have and seeing if these two parties are totally separate and don't have any common ground, or if these two parties are more similar than people would have thought. And I think that's where the interesting content is going to come from. So that's the idea of my concept. So what I've done in preparation was talked to my friend Natasha, and I asked her to come up with some questions that she'd be interested in exploring with me, and I've come up with some questions that I'd be interested in exploring with her. And I'm not aware of the questions she's going to be asking me. She's not aware of the questions that I'm going to be asking her. So I'm going to try to facilitate an interesting kind of conversation that has different viewpoints and explores the first impressions and existing ideas that we have about each other and each other's countries and our own identities, and just see what stems from these prompts and whether we have similar opinions or differing opinions, and whether it becomes entertaining or whether we find things that turns out we really don't like about each other. I really don't know where the conversation is going to go, and I think that's what's going to be interesting about the concept at large. And lastly, I think that the conversation that I've set up with Natasha is definitely going to be lacking, in the sense that I think that having a host is going to be very helpful and very constructive to the actual concept and the actual show that I have, because they'll be able to kind of gauge the flow of the conversation and inject new questions and kind of guide the direction of the conversation if it's lagging, or if it's getting boring at certain points, or if there's a natural time for a new question to be introduced. Whereas with me and Natasha, we've prepared questions for each other, but it might be a little bit choppier and a little less fluid when we're having to decide when we've kind of fleshed out the topic enough on our own, versus having someone who might be able to gauge that independently and then naturally add the next question and the next topic to explore. So the concept that I'm going to be presenting today is definitely not entirely representative of what the main idea for the concept that I have is, but it is the best I can do given the circumstances and the timeline of the length of this video and the resources I have available to me at the moment. So, making the best of what we have, and hopefully, you guys will get the main gist of what I'm looking for, and you'll see the potentiality of what I want to explore with this concept just through this very basic example and exploration that I'm going to present with my friend Natasha. Hey, Natasha, how's it going?
Good. What about you?
Good. So we've gone over the basic concept that I have a little bit, right? And you have the basic understanding of what I'm going to try to get at in this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So originally, the concept idea that I had would start out with some questions that would be pretty uninflammatory and pretty basic and wouldn't dive too in depth on any deep topics or politics, society, etc. But considering that we already know each other and we have the personal relationship and don't necessarily have to go over those basic questions that would have the aim of creating a rapport, and because the time limit is shorter for this concept example, we're just going to be diving into some of the more serious questions that I would ask or the host would ask either of the guests moving forward. So, does that all make sense to you?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, cool. So, I have a list of questions here for you. We're not going to have time to cover all of them, but I'm going to try to pull some of the most interesting ones. So, let's see. I guess we could start with, do you think your hometown is representative of your country?
I think so. There are so many things that come from this place that internationally represent Mexico. For example, tequila.
Ah,
That comes from Jalisco, where I am right now.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think just most of the food here is pretty popular, and the music here, mariachi, came from here. So yeah, I think so.
That's interesting. Do you think that there are a similar level of international products and things that come from areas outside of Jalisco, or do you think that for the most part, what people associate, what foreigners associate with Mexico mainly comes from the state that you're in?
No, I think that many things come from many parts of Mexico. There are definitely some things that are only made in certain states. I cannot tell you specifically which ones and which products, but for example, avocados, we don't have avocados in every single state, or we don't have tequila in every single state. It's not legal to make certain alcoholic drinks in every state, just in like some of them. So yeah, it comes everything that you see from Mexico comes from different parts of.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that being from Vermont, I have pretty much the exact opposite experience where, I mean, obviously, nationally, we're very well known for too many products that I could list, but in terms of the state that I'm from, we have maple syrup and we have Cabot cheddar cheese and dairy products. And I couldn't tell you one other thing that myself or anybody else from America would tell you comes from Vermont. So it's interesting that you could list like five right off the bat that come from Jalisco, and then, dozens of others that come from the rest of the country, because I think that comparatively, Vermont is not representative of America at all, and it's probably one of the most different, I would guess, right upside with Alaska and Hawaii for the states that have the least to do in terms of how representative they are with America at large. So it's interesting that Jalisco is, I don't know, more Mexican, I guess.
Yeah, I had never heard of Vermont before I met you.
Yeah. That's the case with a lot of people, even a lot of Americans. So that's not surprising. Alrighty, and let's see here. Do you feel privileged to have been born into the life that you were born into, and why or why not?
um, yes, because well, first of all, here is well known that it's not the same to have a darker skin than to have white skin here in Mexico, but also because I'm half German, or like I have my German passport, and that helps me a lot when it comes to like I've only traveled to the US once, but even that one time I had so many privileges at the airport. Like they didn't check my stuff. They let me skip so many lines,
Hmm.
and I was going with Mexicans. So they all had to do the same as everyone else. And I was just like waiting for them because I didn't have to do the line or because I was being like checked up.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just easier to like when you're whiter or like you have lighter skin,
Hmm.
um, people tend to think that you come from like a higher class.
Yeah.
Um,
You're saying.
and also, just like when it comes to education, I did have access to a private school when I was younger, and that's why I can speak English relatively well. Um, and most people can't. Like there are a lot of people my age that do not know how to speak English correctly.
Yeah.
But it's because public schools don't really give that much importance to English, so
Yeah, it's
that's why.
interesting that you bring up education because one of the other questions that I was going to ask is how available do you feel like opportunities to progress in your life, whether that means financially or scholastically or in terms of where you're living exist and are available to you. And the one thing I was thinking about from previous conversations that we had is that, in the 8 years that I've been in school so far and have had relatively inexpensive tuition fees, no room and board for the last 2 to 3 years, etc., I'm already $60,000 in debt. And when I've spoken to you, you pay what's the equivalent of like a 14th of a penny to go to school per semester. So I was thinking, a lot of people might think about Mexico and be like, oh, why would I go internationally to get a degree there? Where it's like, you could come here and get $100,000 in debt, or you could go to Mexico. And you had mentioned the school in, is it Mexico City, the really good school?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and the tuition there was like a penny a semester. So I'm like, so I think in terms of an education, you might actually have the advantage and the opportunity there to get an education more easily and more affordably than 99% of Americans. And I don't know if that's available to 99% of Mexicans, but those of you that can go to that school or go to other, institutions can do it and exit without any debt or, a little bit of debt. So that's definitely an opportunity that you guys enjoy that we definitely do not. So that was pretty cool. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's still pretty competitive. Like you have to do a test and you have to do all these things to get into that school.
Yeah.
So of course, a lot of people get in, but a lot of people are also left out, which is still pretty sad. And also, not many schools have international recognition, which I mean, to most people, is not really important.
Mhm.
But to me, that I actually want to go abroad and work abroad, is pretty important to me. So I actually looked for a career that was internationally recognized.
Yeah.
And also, here is kind of like, remembering the conversations we had about this, it's pretty common that I think you told me that if you just study college, like you can get a job relatively easily.
Hmm.
Um, Here, it's not that easy to get a job, even if you have a degree. Like you would need like a master's degree minimum or
Hmm.
like a PhD to actually get a good job. Because school is so accessible to people, um, they demand more from you. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. I think I don't have any numbers on what the like average placement rate per university or per universities on average in the States is, but I would imagine it's pretty high. So you could be right in saying that it's easier to get an education there, but it's harder to actually get a job placement. And I mean, during COVID and living in a really rural state, I'm on the opposite side of that spectrum, even if we do have good placement rates nationally statewide, and especially during these times, it's been hard for me as well. So I can definitely understand the frustrations that come from spending X amount of dollars and X amount of time getting an education and then not being able to do anything with that education. So that's interesting that we share that.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so let's see here. This is a good one. What do you think of when you think of your co-guest's country? What are like the first things that come to your mind when you think of America? Good or bad? What jumped to your mind?
I mean, honestly, I just thought of the word gringo, but also I guess just I think one of the words that first come to mind is just like love-hate relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of Mexicans have this really weird relationship with the US, including me. Like I have this weird thing with the US when it's like I hate it, but I also like admire it. Like it's pretty cool, but I also hate it because of the things we have been taught in history and like, oh my god, they took some of our territory, like they're
Yeah.
the devil. And like
Yeah.
I get that. Um,
So when
but
you say the things that are taught in school, when I think of American history, I think of we might cover the Alamo for about 2 days max in history class out of the X amount of years we're in high school. So what do you guys learn in elementary school, high school, college about the history between America and Mexico?
I don't really remember exactly like the dates and everything, but I remember specifically there was this one class when it was like, oh yeah, Mexico used to be so huge, like used to be big, and then Americans came and they took it from us.
Yeah.
And I remember my mom picking me up from school that day, and I was like, Mom, I would never move to America, like ever. And she was like, Why? And I was like, Do you know what they did to us? They took our land.
What did she say?
And she just laughed. But
Uh-huh.
like that's so vividly,
Yeah.
vividly.
And
I
so
was so
you have a like a or you and most Mexicans have a love-hate relationship. Is the love-hate relationship feeling oppressed or treated as like secondhand citizens or excluded by America, but then there's an overarching desire for so many people to relocate to America? Like, what's the love? What's the hate?
yeah, so like the hate is pretty much um America has always made us feel like we're the victim, and we were like it's almost like we feel like they're the bullies.
Yeah.
Um but still it's if I could put it one way, it's like they're the mean girls at school. And you hate them and they treat you so badly. But at the end of the day, if you actually go hang out with them, if you go be a part of them, you will be like respected and have like a better experience. So I would say that's the best way to explain it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think there's a similar relationship in America. I think it's probably similar in Mexico, where in Sonora or some of the more northern areas in the country, they have different opinions because they're so close to the border. And I would imagine, being in Texas is similar, or being in Southern California is similar. Your opinions might vary a lot. Whereas I'm from Vermont, so I think very little about immigration laws and everything because we hardly have anybody that's not a Vermonter here, let alone, it's rare to see somebody from Ohio here, let alone to see a Mexican here. I think I've seen one Mexican person from Mexico, not just of Mexican descent, here in the entire time I've been here. And I actually ran into him fishing on this lake in the middle of nowhere, so it was pretty strange. Um, but for me and for a lot of people in this country, especially liberal people, we support immigration and think that's one of the cornerstones of what built this country and everything. But there's definitely a large population and a lot of our politicians that want to limit immigration and look at Mexicans as second class citizens. And yeah, it's interesting, especially because a lot of there's like a whole piece of rhetoric that's been around for decades now, and South Park has made fun of it, and it's kind of common and colloquial in conversation where people are like, "Oh yeah, the Mexicans are coming over to take our jobs," and then it's like a lawyer or something that you wouldn't expect, or a doctor is like, saying this, and they're like getting all worked up that these people are coming over and working really hard in jobs that they would never do. Or it's people who are receiving government assistance and they're like, these people are taking our jobs. And it's like, dude, you could absolutely go work that job. You're just not going to do it. So why are you getting so worked up that these people are coming over? So yeah, I think that I would say the people who maybe we have less of a love-hate relationship and we have more of either side. Maybe there are those of us, there's more of a majority of those of us who are just like, yeah, we have absolutely no problems with Mexicans. Like if they want to come over, come on over, relocate, that's fine. And then there's an equal amount of people who are like, absolutely not, close down the borders. Obviously, Trump trying to build a wall was a major global headline for months and months. So yeah, I think that that exists pretty countrywide, that love or hate relationship. Maybe not in the same way that it does in Mexico, but I can definitely see where you're coming from.
Yeah. And it's also kind of funny that you mentioned the states like Sonora and the ones that are closer to the US, because they actually feel closer to the US than they feel to Mexico, which is kind of a debate,
Oh,
but
to
internal.
Mexicans, you mean it feels, when you think of Sonora, it feels more like an American state than it does a Mexican state?
Not like for me, they're like 100% Mexican states, but they themselves,
Oh, okay.
like talk to one of them, they might be like, yeah, I kind of feel close to America as well,
Uh,
which is kind of weird, but
yeah. I was just thinking how funny it would be if someone was like, you know, where are you from? And someone was like, oh, I'm from America. And they're like, oh, what state do you live in? And they're like, Sonora. I'd be like, I'm sorry, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but that's not actually acknowledged as a state. But no, that's interesting that that's the case.
yeah, it's kind of weird. But we don't talk.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of, you know, different identities, state by state and everything, here, you know, Texans or maybe people from Mississippi, Alabama, like the deep South, they might be like, oh, you know, those libtards in California, and the Californians might be like, yeah, those intolerant idiots in Texas and Alabama. You know, they might group people in state by state, but I think the majority of Americans wouldn't think like, oh, someone from New York or oh, someone from Colorado or Nebraska. Like, yeah, that's a very different person in a very different state. So when you say like Sonorans identify more as American or, you know, think that they have more American traits, whatever the case may be, do you think in Mexico there's like very unique identities state by state, or do you think it's more of like an overarching Mexican identity and nationality?
I mean, here I feel like here states are very, I don't know, I feel like every single state, I don't know if it's the same in America, I don't think so. But here, every single state has something that is so unique to that state,
Mm-hmm.
um, that every single one of them is so like unique and different. And even though we all speak Spanish, the accents are also so different. I know that's the thing in America as well. And for example, stereotypes, I think it's funny that the stereotypes you have for the southern area are
Yeah.
the same ones we have for the north area.
Really? I mean,
But one of the,
hey, if those places are closer, like you were saying, and they kind of identify as more American and stuff, it almost makes sense that like our southern states and your northern states are, we're both looking at those states and being like, yeah, those are the, you know, the stereotypes you were talking about, like the rednecks or
yeah,
the, you know, the hillbillies, the like country. That's funny. I didn't know that you guys thought about the northern states like that. Is
yeah,
there,
it's kind of funny.
are there, are there like, you know, tech industries and like major metropolitan areas up north, like, you know, Guadalajara or Mexico City, or are most of those metropolitan areas and like technology hubs and everything in like the South or central Mexico or on the coasts?
I am not sure, but I don't think there's that many. Because even for college, um, most people come here from Chiapas or Sonora. I have so many classmates that come from all over Mexico, and they're all either in Mexico City, in Guadalajara, or in Monterrey, which are like the three biggest cities in Mexico. So I don't think so. Maybe like one or two, but I don't think that, I don't know. It's like some parts of Mexico, the most like tourist ones are the most developed ones, and
Yeah.
then the other ones are just like countryside and just some buildings, but it's not as much of a city. So I wouldn't think so.
Yeah.
I haven't visited all of Mexico. So
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And do you have any questions that you thought would be interesting to explore?
yes, I do have some. Well, first, I have this question, um, which I guess you already asked me, but I'm gonna ask you as well.
Hmm.
And how do they teach, or what do they teach about Mexico in America?
I think that I think that pretty much the extent of our international education in terms of history is almost entirely limited to wars that we've been in. So that's
All
why I
right.
was saying that, we might learn a little bit about the Alamo. And when I say like a little bit about the Alamo, it was like there was a fight at this place called the Alamo. And that's like essentially all we learn. And then, we learn German history, but I mean, you'll learn the most basic. You probably wouldn't even know about Prussia versus Germany before World War II. You're probably
Oh,
just like, oh yeah, Germany. There was there was a First World War there, and then also they were responsible for the Second World War. So I would say that we learn about, German history, and tied to that, we'd learn about British, French, we'd learn about the Allied and Axis powers in the years from 1918 to 1950, maybe. And if it's not directly related to even the Vietnam and Korean War, I think we're taught very little about each of those countries. So like you'll learn little bullet points about the Vietnam War, the Korean War, World War II, World War One. But otherwise, we learn very little about international history. So honestly, I can't think of a single class that I've had that was, and I mean, not even a full class, I mean a day. I can't think of a single day in a single class I've ever had that was solely dedicated to learning Mexican history or any other country's history for that point. If it wasn't like a specialized history class in a college, it was like if you were just in a history class in high school, yeah, it was like, we gained independence and then we're going to learn about American history, up through the Civil War and then the Industrial Revolution. And then we went into World Wars, and it's very patriotic. And you're learning that, I think, I can't remember if we mentioned it in this conversation or if it was something we've talked about before, but that the light is shed on like us being the heroes, and it was like, yeah, the world was collapsing, and like it was on the brink of, everyone was about to die, and then the Americans rode in and we saved the world, and we did it twice. So yeah, it's definitely a very limited history that we learn. And I think there's a lot of people who are interested in history in America, and there's a lot of smart people and good students, so they will learn more about international history and the history of other countries. But in terms of what we're taught here in the core curriculum in high school, yeah, I couldn't tell you a thing about Mexican history aside from maybe when who was it that colonized South America in like the 1500s? Was that Drake, Sir Francis Drake? Who was it?
Columbus or what?
Oh, not Columbus. Anyway, it's irrelevant. But in terms of, before Europeans sailed across the Atlantic, we learned we learn about them sailing over and then like conquering and doing a bunch of bad stuff, and then we totally forget about history, and then we learn about American history. So yeah, we definitely learn very little, which is unfortunate.
Wait, so do you not know like what was before in America? Like before all that?
Do we not know what was before in America, or do we not know what was before in like Central and South America or like Mexico? What do you mean?
Like specifically in America? Because like here is like, oh, the Aztecs and all this religion and
We learn about Native Americans. I don't know if it's the same in Mexico. I know it probably is. I know that there's a few different native tribes and ethnicities, and populations in Mexico. It's not just like all formerly Aztec, or there are varying groups. And in America, I can think of like six right off the top of my head, and they all control different areas in America. And I would guess there was, I'd say comfortably dozens, if not more, different tribes. So we don't learn about all the different tribes and where they lived and everything, but we do learn basic history of, I guess we don't learn we don't learn Native American history. I guess we only learn Native American relations in regards to the colonialists who came over from Europe. So no, I guess we really don't. Do you guys learn about pre-colonization? And
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember much of it, but I do remember like in elementary school we used to have like this book that would tell us about the different tribes and what they used to do, like what they used to eat, what was their, like all these cultural aspects about them. About every single one. I remember it was very annoying.
Yeah,
it's
there's
something.
What's the Three Sisters, right? Is that what it is? Like
I
May,
don't know
it
what they're
was
called honestly, but
it's like the staples of the native population's diet. It's like maize, um, beans. Do you know what I'm talking about or no?
I have no idea.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I think that we learn a little bit of history that's probably insulting to the Native Americans to learn, because we're like, oh, they lived off the land and they ate corn and they hunted deer. And it's like they were probably so much more than that. And we were just like, oh, wow, they're so natural. And like, so it's probably like not a appropriate history at all, or like a representative history to learn at all. But that's like the very basic history that we do learn. And that
Yeah, I mean,
actually,
I remember about like the architecture and the all the gods that they have and the different names they had for the gods and everything like that. So yeah.
yeah. And with regards to like the native population in Mexico, here I think our African American population is like 13% of the population, or somewhere around there roughly. And I would imagine, again, I don't have the numbers, but I would think that the Native American population is even lower. So in regards to like the native populations in Mexico, do you guys have like would you guess that you guys have a larger population of native tribes, or is it mostly, um, I don't even know if you would consider who you would consider Mexican versus native, but do you understand what I'm asking? Like what is the population of who would be considered native? Are there a
Yeah.
lot?
No, actually, they're not that many. And here is very well known that we've kind of forced them to let go of all their culture and let go of all their languages and forced to speak Spanish and act like we do. And yeah, that's actually a very big issue here in Mexico, because we really, like our president, I don't know if you heard, but like our president was telling was telling Spain that, everything they did to us and they took away our culture and everything. But like we're doing the same thing every single day with indigenous.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's like a lot of parallels there with America. We try to be the police of the world and like lead by, we've assumed this role of like the moral leaders of the world, and will condemn people for things that they're doing in their country. But then it's just like you're saying with the treatment of the natives in Mexico, it's like there are plenty of populations in our country that we're just treating horribly, and we're like, hey, you shouldn't treat your populations like that. And it's like, there's not a lot of reflection on how we're treating our own population. So yeah, I can definitely relate to what you're saying there.
yeah, and even when it comes to immigrants, every single Mexican here is like, oh my God, America, so racist, Donald Trump, the worst. But here, how we treat immigrants from Central America or like South America is the same.
Really?
Yeah, we're as racist as the US. Maybe we're not, we don't have that many like policies
Mm-hmm.
as the US have for us.
Yeah.
But the treatment and the idea of them being, criminals, or them being dangerous, or them maybe not being like worth of a job. Like the ideas are there.
Yeah.
And it's pretty sad because like you demand something that you are not giving other people. So
Yeah. No, I totally understand what you're saying. It seems like there's a lot of those parallels in a lot of countries, We like condemn the actions of others and we're doing the same exact thing in our own countries. So that definitely makes sense. And are like Southern and Central American people migrating to Mexico, or are they like migrating to Mexico to pass through to try to get to America?
no, they're just going to America.
Just going to America. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's
Well,
interesting.
one of the other questions was, would you die for your country? Because I've been asked this question in a class before, and every single person in the class said no. I mean, we wouldn't die.
Wow. I mean, I think, we were there have been a lot of parallels between Mexican and American culture and, identities, and whether you'd want to call that like military ideology or something. I'm not sure right now what percentage of, fighting age people would answer yes to that question, but I would guess that if you asked pretty much any college classroom or something, I would still guess that the majority of the people in the classroom would say yes. So it's interesting that you would say that like nobody in your classrooms is saying yes. And I think post 9/11, immediately after 9/11, I would guess it was like 99.999% of people are saying yes. Since then, and all of the news that's come to light, and how troubled our interventions and wars have been in the Middle East, I would guess that number has dropped a lot. And personally, I think had I been a fighting age post 9/11, and had I not understood the real actors behind 9/11, and thought that, oh, we're going to Iraq and they're directly responsible for 9/11, let's do it, then I think that the answer would have been yes. But since then, it's hard to say because there's not really like a common enemy, and especially with terror organizations being the target of, or the focus of news, and that's like public enemy number one, for lack of a better term. um I think more people would be inclined to say no, because you're not really going to fight like an organized, centralized force. It's just like, oh, so we're going to go to another country and the people there aren't going to want us there, and they're not going to be our enemies, and we're going to be intruding in their lives and making things hard for them, trying to find the people we are trying to fight. So I think a lot of people, myself included, would be inclined to say no nowadays. Whereas if there was another conflict like World War II, or something that was a lot more clear cut, I think a lot more of the answers would be yes, myself included, because I think there you're at least more understood to be like standing for the ideologies of your country and protecting your countrymen and trying to protect your people who share the same ideology abroad and stuff. So I think it really depends on what the conflict is, but I would guess that yes, there are a lot of Americans who would say that they are willing to die for their country.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
mean, here, I don't know. It's just like it's such an open discussion. The fact that the government is just the worst. Everyone here hates the government.
Yeah.
They think it doesn't work. So when you ask something like that, it's like, why would I die for something that is not willing to do the bare minimum for me?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I think that goes to my other question that I honestly don't know how to say it correctly. I don't know how to formulate this question, but
Okay.
I would like to see your opinion on like what do you think, or what do you think America is doing right to make Americans have such this passion for their country and feel so like connected to it and feel like it's the best, and if it's not the best then it's gonna improve someday somehow.
Yeah. No, I
Like
totally understand what you're saying. Um, and it's a good question. I think that um It's really hard to say. It's probably a big part of it is just that that's ingrained in us. And like you were saying with um, the government doing the bare minimum in Mexico to provide for their citizens. So why would they die for their government? I think here we're, it's part of our foundation and it's part of our ethos that we want to be independent from the government and everything. And so we feel very strongly about our independence and being able to act on our own volition. And at the end of the day, we also have a government that will, you know, some populations and groups of people definitely aren't provided for in the same way as others. But I would say, in comparison to a lot of other countries, there's a lot of people who, if they need food stamps or if they need assistance with their living, etc., excuse me, you have access to that. So I think the level of safety and the level of survivability, for lack of a better word, in America, you might not be having a great life, but there's not bombs going off in your community. There's not foreign soldiers in your community. There's not like civil war raging, etc. So I think compared to a lot of other places, we are secure in our basic human needs. So I think that, and just the perception that we are number one, like you said, even if you're dissatisfied with your life and dissatisfied with your country and your government, you still have this kind of underlying notion that, like, yeah, things might not be the best, but we're still number one. So I think that's definitely a big part of it. Yeah, why do you think that that's not the case in Mexico? Do you think it's because there's just a lack of provision of like basic, or how broken the government is? What do you think's responsible for like the opposite? If we feel very passionately, why do you think that Mexicans don't share that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just like seeing all this. Um, it's just that people here like openly talk about politics and everything
Yeah.
and money and all these things, all these like delicate things, or maybe delicate in other countries.
Hmm.
Here, one just talks, even on TV, you can turn on the TV and people are already talking very badly about the government.
Yeah.
Um, so it's something that even if you're just listening to the news while you're getting ready for school and you're not even watching it, it's your dad or your mom. In my case, my dad used to watch the news while I got ready for school, and just listening, being like, oh, the country is doing this and that, like it sucks and it's terrible and it's awful. And then, voting, it's like voting time and everyone is just like, yeah, there's no one to vote for because everyone sucks. Like you have to vote for the least worst, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot
um
of sense. Yeah.
yeah, so like, just since you're a child, you just have this idea of just this country is not the best. And at school, usually people would tell you like, oh, you can go abroad and do this job, you can find jobs abroad, you can do this abroad. And like, you get that idea of, all right, then the only way I'm going to succeed if I get out of this country. Not really like if I make this country better, or like how can I make it. It's more of like, how can I get out of here so I can actually like start doing something.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of options in my state and my country, I might not be able to get the job of my dreams and everything, but I could, when I think about getting a $30,000 to $50,000 a year job, that's something I know I could do relatively easily. And again, you might not be living the most lavish life, but in terms of being a single 26-year-old guy, I could definitely be getting by. So when you're saying like, oh, if you want to succeed, you got to go international. Do you think that when you think about like availability of jobs in Mexico, do you think like, yeah, but if I stayed here, I could still make a comfortable living? Or is it more like, no, if I stay here and don't get like one of the best jobs, I'm not going to have a good future at all?
It's just that here, I mean, I mentioned the job factor, but there's so many other like little factors as like security. Like I know that I'm never gonna be able to walk in the middle of the night. I mean, it's obviously dangerous at some point in every single country,
Yeah.
but here I know for a fact that I'm not gonna ever be able to just like take the bus without being so freaking scared.
Yeah.
So instead of people just being like, oh, well, you can do something to like make that better. It's like, just go somewhere else. Just go somewhere where it's less
Yeah.
dangerous. Just somewhere where people don't kill women. Just go somewhere
Yeah.
where, yeah. So like, I guess if I think of the job itself, I think I could get a pretty good job and like live comfortably.
Mhm.
But in terms of economically speaking, like not really security wise, because I will always be in danger here. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess that kind of ties into a question that I had, which was, if you could change one thing about your country, what would you change?
I mean, I think just one thing would just be corruption, which is, you know, very big, a very like big concept that just I think would fix so many things.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I would say, because like at the end of the day, corruption makes the country be insufficient, and it makes people be poor, and it makes people turn into illegal ways of making money instead of legal ones because they're easier, and they make people, you know, rob other people to just
Yeah.
to survive the day. And so I think that it would fix so many problems. How? I don't know. I mean, how
Yeah.
does this?
Yeah. And I think like a big, a big perception of Mexico that Americans have is just like, oh yeah, the cartels run Mexico. And like, don't go to Mexico because you're going to get kidnapped by a cartel and they're either going to take all your money or kill you or both. So like when you're saying, there are these economic struggles and societal problems and stuff that make an inefficiency that are making people turn to crime or whatever to get by, what percentage of that is like people just doing petty crime and theft or something like that, and what percentage of that, just obviously off the top of your head, do you think is actually like, oh, this is organized crime, x amount of people from my city are definitely working with that cartel? Like how much of it is like really serious, really scary versus just like people doing what they have to do to get by?
I don't know. I would definitely say that most people do that just because, I don't know, they're mean people.
Mhm.
And they want they see life, I guess. And they I don't know, I guess I couldn't tell you a percentage like at all. I have no idea.
Fair.
But like there's pretty bad people here. But I don't think, like, it's kind of weird that you say that about cartels.
Yeah.
Because here in Mexico, I think, at least the way I see it and the way I've heard people see it, is that unless you get involved, they won't touch you.
Okay.
Like, they won't have issues with them. They won't kidnap you unless.
Yeah.
But that's also like pretty sad, because every time someone gets killed, it's like he was probably into something. Like he was probably doing something wrong,
Yeah.
which may be the case, but it may also not be the case. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of like this weird idea of just don't go to the places where you know that they are, because there are like specific towns where you know that it's mostly their town, so
Yeah.
you just don't go there. And it's, at least here, it's not that common to hear like innocents being killed just for, or kidnapped just for fun, or just for like,
yeah.
like it's
Okay.
it's all because they were going after someone, or they were going after something.
Yeah.
Usually
That makes sense. And I think that's definitely that. I think that would be news to a lot of Americans. I think most Americans have the perception that like, oh yeah, if you go anywhere in Mexico, you will be kidnapped by the cartel. Like, I think that is an understanding, or a false understanding that a lot of people have, a false idea that a lot of Americans have about Mexico. So it's interesting to hear someone who lives in Mexico being like, no, that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it can happen.
Yeah.
But it's just most of the times it's not the case.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Even there's this one story that, I mean, that just kind of shows how corrupted the government is as well, and the police is as well. But there was this one story where there was this guy who was telling that his brother had disappeared, and he told the police officer, and the police officer was like, listen, you can either present a case and probably be dead tomorrow, or you can just leave them alone, because your brother was probably most likely involved in something, and you don't want to mess with those people. So like, you can either try to fight and maybe get killed, or just let it go and assume, or like just accept that it happened, and
Yeah.
that your brother probably got into some pretty sticky situation.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's pretty shocking that the police officer is the
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Do you know what happened with that case?
No.
Uh,
And I want to know.
yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Oh, I was gonna see if I had any more really particularly interesting questions here. I had, would you leave your country and permanently relocate? But we kind of already covered that. Okay, so I guess we could try to end on a positive note. So what's your favorite thing about being a Mexican?
I like, I do like Mexican culture a lot.
Mhm.
I might not, it's kind of a weird thing. I think most Mexicans, I cannot speak for all the Mexicans, but I feel like most people can really make, really like take Mexican culture and Mexico as two different things. Because
Mhm.
Mexico, like the government and corruption and all of that, but Mexican culture is like the food and the
Yeah,
music
def-
and all things and all, and this great people, because people are actually nice here and they're so kind. And I love that. I love that part of Mexico. It's just the politics side of it
mhm.
that sucks. And sadly, politics is very important in a country,
Yeah,
and it's determines, or like
determined.
makes um like stick together.
Yeah.
Well, there are many things that I like about Mexico, and like the language and
Mm.
all the culture, but politics is always involved, and the politics part of Mexico is the thing that's kind of
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. No, I totally see what you're saying, and I think there is like a, if an American at least is not thinking about the politics of Mexico and is thinking more of the culture, I think for those who actually know and understand Mexican culture, I think they have a relatively good grip on what it is, and we really appreciate it. Obviously, the food is one of the most popular foods in the world, and Americans love Mexican food. But in terms of knowing about like the playfulness of the people and the language, like, the Mexicans are super funny and very playful and very like energetic, not even in like I mean, in addition to what they're speaking of, just the way they speak. It's like a very musical almost language, and like playful, or like the intonations and everything are friendly and easy to listen to. And I mean, I've been to Mexico quite a few times myself, and like you were saying, the people are some of the sweetest people you'll ever meet, and they're hardworking and just great people. So yeah, I can see what you're saying there, and I think there's a lot of similarities as well with Americans. I think we're very hated abroad, but then a lot of the times, I've heard from a lot of people who either go to school internationally or are from a different country, and I think, Parisians and Romans, and there are definitely certain groups of foreigners who do not like when Americans come over to their cities or countries at all. But I've also heard just as many, if not more, I think more likely more stories of people being like, "Oh yeah, we love when Americans come to town. They're like loud and funny and just like super different, and they tip. They like tip super well." Like, yeah. So I think that it's similar. Like, people think of like Americans and they think of the politics and like the policing, and they're just like, "Oh my God, like Americans." But then you actually get to know an American, and you're like, "Oh yeah, they're pretty funny, like decent people." If they're not like the neo Nazis and
Yeah.
some terrible demographics of Americans. For the most part, we're friendly, we're outgoing, people like that. So yeah, I can definitely see what you're saying there. And I would say that's probably my favorite, yeah, my favorite thing about being an American as well is um, the friendliness of 99.9% of people is being able to, wherever you are in any state, you can just talk to the cashier at the local grocery store, or your waiter, or your doctor, and have a good time and feel like you're connecting on more than just like a pleasantry level. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for sharing your time with me.
you're welcome. I learned a lot too. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciated your insight and everything.
all right.
Well, I'll talk to you next time. It was good to see you.
Good to see you too.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye.